Greenland. For most of the world, it sounded like a strange headline, a business eccentricity from a billionaire president that belonged more in a tabloid than in a geopolitical manual. But what if I told you that what happened in Greenland was not a joke, but a funeral? Specifically, the funeral of the Western world as we have known it for the last 80 years. The old association between the United States and Europe, that ironclad trust between historical partners that survived the Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall, is currently taking on water. And we can say it loud and clear, without filters. Atlantic relations are not going to be the same again, and they will not be for a very long time. The strategic balance of power that existed for decades has just been blown to pieces. The show in Greenland has come to a definitive end, but its consequences are just beginning to be felt. The United States has officially ruled out an invasion, of course, but it has created a specialized negotiating group to achieve a new type of access to that frozen territory. We are talking about an agreement that involves opening new military bases, and not just any bases, but territories that would be considered sovereign soil of the United States, similar to the status of an international embassy. Denmark claims to know nothing about this, but the pressure from Washington is real. They are looking for strategic control, intelligence operations, and a direct gateway to the Arctic's natural resources. It is the typical fanfare of a Washington administration that no longer asks for permission, but demands results. But the real question is not what happens with the ice of Greenland, but what is happening in the corridors of power in Washington. Why force the situation to such an extreme? Why blackmail and publicly coerce your own historical allies? The wounds are deep and they will remain open. As the German Chancellor recently said, the decades of Pax Americana have practically ended for Europe. The era where the United States was the benevolent protector and the ultimate guarantor of stability is over. And if we look at the last few months, the evidence is overwhelming. We have seen a shift in the global paradigm that is changing everything. In 2025, we witnessed how Washington pushed commercial negotiations to a breaking point, establishing a completely asymmetric framework. We are talking about 0% tariffs for American products entering Europe, while European products face a 15% tax in the United States, in addition to a 50% surcharge on steel and aluminum. This is not a partnership, it is a siege. At the same time, the White House has systematically despised the European position in the conflict in Ukraine, while simultaneously sending the bill for the war and reconstruction to European taxpayers. The new national security strategy of the United States situates the old continent not as a vibrant partner, but as a land in decline. This is not a coincidence or a momentary fit of rage. It responds to a radical shift in how the American political elite understands the international order. There is a structural change taking place, a return to a position from the early 20th century where Europe is no longer considered an essential actor for American interests. There are three powerful reasons that explain this massive U-turn, and we need to analyze them deeply to understand where the world is headed. The first reason is strategic and military. After the Second World War, Western Europe was the bulwark against communism, the wall that separated two worlds. In Washington, the Soviet Union was perceived as an existential threat, and European armies were large, well-funded, and highly operational. But today, the world is different. After the end of the Cold War, the United States no longer perceives Russia as an existential threat in the same way. They see it as a minor actor, a declining power with which part of the American elite even feels a certain cultural affinity. Furthermore, Europe used the peace dividend to demilitarize at high speed. Today, from the perspective of the White House, the old allies are no longer a valuable asset for national security, but a burden that requires constant protection without offering enough in return. The second reason is purely economic. For decades, Europe was the only crucial commercial partner. There was no alternative. But today, while the European Union remains a major investor, it is no longer a dynamic partner. The growth of the world is happening elsewhere. The demographic aging and economic stagnation of the old continent have caused its weight in the global economy to collapse. In the 80s, Europe represented almost 30% of the global gross domestic product. Today, it is less than 15% and dropping. Meanwhile, the United States has managed to maintain its weight reasonably well. For American business interests, Europe is a market that is small, distant from new digital technologies, and overly regulated. The third reason is political and cultural. For a long time, Americans saw Europe as their ancestral home, the place where their parents and grandparents came from. But that feeling has diluted. Today, Europe is no longer a cultural or religious reference for the United States. In fact, the two societies are diverging at a frantic pace. While Europe has secularized rapidly, the United States has developed deeper religious sentiments in certain political sectors. Silicon Valley technology has replaced European art and history as the ideal to pursue. For many in Washington, the old continent is now seen as a decadent land, a place of socialist policies and stagnant ideas that represent everything they want to avoid. In short, Europe has moved from being a model to being a cultural antagonist. This shift was clearly seen at the Davos Forum. Never before had an American president's speech aroused so little affection. Never before had world leaders spoken so poorly of the United States in the corridors, questioning its policies and its leadership. The tension was so thick it could be cut with a knife. And this is where the most dangerous part of the story begins. This vacuum left by the United States is being filled by someone else. Trump may have given the definitive push for Europe to turn its gaze completely toward Asia, toward India, and especially toward China. But here we find a giant trap. While Europe tries to look for new partners to survive the abandonment of Washington, it is being hit by what experts call the second Chinese shock. To understand this, we have to look at what is happening inside the Chinese factories. Beijing is facing its own crisis, with a real estate bubble that has burst and a domestic economy that is not consuming enough. The Chinese government's solution is to force its companies to produce at full capacity and export everything they can, even without profits, just to maintain employment and social stability. The result is a trade surplus of $1.2 trillion, a historic record. And since the United States has closed its doors to Chinese products with massive tariffs, all that industrial production is flooding Europe. We are talking about a tsunami of cheap products that the European industry cannot compete with. The most dramatic example is the automotive sector. China has a manufacturing capacity of 55 million cars per year, but they only sell 30 million at home. That means there are 25 million cars that need to find a home outside of China. And that home is Europe. While European brands lose market share in China, Chinese cars are flooding European ports. And it is not just finished products. China is exporting assembly plants to countries like Hungary and Spain to bypass European tariffs. It is a master move. If Europe closes its borders, it loses the chance to negotiate with the new global giant. If it keeps them open, its own industry could disappear. Facing this scenario of extreme instability, you have to ask yourself, what am I doing to protect my own economy? While the great powers play this geopolitical chess, inflation and market shifts can destroy your savings if you do not have the right tools. This is why we always recommend Trade Republic. In a world where alliances break and markets flood, you need a safe place for your money. With Trade Republic, you are not just using a bank, you are using a tool supervised by the Central Bank of Europe and the German Bundesbank. You receive an annual interest of 2.00% on your cash without doing anything, and you can manage your investments in actions and funds from a single place. If the world is changing, your way of saving must change too. You have the link and the code in the description to start protecting your future today. Returning to the geopolitical arena, the situation for Europe is desperate. If the United States treats you like an enemy and China floods you with products that destroy your factories, what is the exit? Many analysts in Brussels are starting to suggest that the only way out is a direct pact with Beijing. Improving relations with China could help European companies regain presence in that massive market and balance the trade scales. It would also be a way to gain strategic independence from Washington. However, this move is high risk. China is not a simple partner. Its national interests always come before any economic agreement. But when your historical protector threatens to shatter your economy every 2 months, you are forced to look for options. The irony is that the same policy that was supposed to contain China is ending up giving it more influence than ever. Leaders from all over the world, from South Korea to Canada and Germany, are making pilgrimages to Beijing to secure their future. Europe is currently the main battlefield of a rivalry it did not choose. It is trapped between an aggressive America that sees it as a museum and a China that sees it as a warehouse for its excess production. The coming years will be decisive. Will the European Union be able to activate a commercial bazooka to protect itself? Or is it destined to become a territory shared by two empires that no longer respect its sovereignty? The Atlantic Alliance is not just cracked. It is in a process of total reconfiguration. The old world order has died, and what is being born in its place is still uncertain. I want to know what you think about this. Do you think Europe is right to look toward China to survive the American abandonment? Or is it falling into a trap from which it will never be able to escape? Leave your opinion in the comments, because this debate is just beginning. If you found this analysis useful, do not forget to support the channel. I am your host, and this was a deep dive into the new reality of our world. See you in the next one.